Hello and welcome to episode number 331. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Herzlich willkommen, bienvenue, benvenuto and welcome. When you think of your project manager skills, then compassion is probably not the first word that comes to mind. You would probably first list some other hard project management tools and techniques like your scheduling abilities or completing your projects on scope and on budget. And only if you keep adding words to this project management skills list will you eventually come to terms like conflict management, team building, empathy, and compassion. Well, Margaret Meloni says that we project managers should value compassion much more than we do. If you are preparing for your PMP exam, then the best way to calm the butterflies in your stomach is to take a practice exam. Our PMP exam simulator offers 9 such practice exams. To see how it works and take a free test drive, please go to freeexamsimulator.com. But back to compassion. So, if we are supposed to use compassion as one of our project management soft skills, then we have to first define what it is, see how it relates to project management, and hear examples of how to use it on our projects. And that is exactly what you are going to get from Margaret's interview. But the most important question that I ever asked Margaret is this. If compassion is truly so important for me as a project manager, how can I see quantifiable results on my projects? And since I know that you want to be the best project manager you can possibly be, please enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcasts feature interview. Today with Margaret Meloni, community leader at elearningforpms.com and pmstudent.com.
Hello, Margaret, and welcome back to the Project Management Podcast.
Hi, Cornelius. Always fun to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, this is interview number 3 million that you and I did.
I'm so glad you're not asking me for the precise number because I don't know, but I know that it's always something enjoyable and I always appreciate the opportunity to do it. So thank you, whether this is 3 million or 5 million or as many hamburgers as McDonald's has sold, whichever.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. Let's look to the end of this interview here. Tell us, what can our listeners expect from our conversation? What will they learn about compassion? What's in it for them?
Well, at the end, don't they just get your music? I'm just kidding. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Sorry,
yeah,
everybody.
They get a joke at the end and some music, yes.
That's what they expect at the end. Okay, what you're going to know at the end, what you will understand at the end of this conversation is why do we care about the difference between things like pity and compassion, empathy and compassion? Why is it important? It's not just something that's touchy-feely. In fact, if I can just start a little bit right now,
go, yeah.
I just want everyone to know that business schools are already paying attention to this. So this is not just a woo-woo, if I can use that term, thing. There's something called Positive Organizational Scholarship, or POS, and it's kind of like a cross between positive psychology and anthropology in a sense. And it's being tied to situations at work and what a group of people are doing. There's somebody at University of Michigan. There's some people at UC Irvine, some of the universities on the East Coast. What they're looking at is what they call positive deviances. And a positive deviance is what makes an organization successful. And compassion, culture of compassion is beginning to show up. And
that's very interesting.
So there's a reason. Like, I tend to be that person who will kind of talk about things like you should do this because it's a good thing to do to treat each other well. But what I'm learning more is to talk more in terms of like specific of hard, more hard data, because that's helpful to a lot of people.
Okay, well, let's go back to the beginning here. What exactly do you mean by compassion?
Okay, when I am speaking about compassion, I'm talking about, I guess I would call it like a 3-part definition. And the first is that you notice the suffering of others or another person. So noticing that somebody is suffering, feeling empathy In other words, feeling like I see somebody is suffering and this touches me in a way that I feel upset that they are suffering, and I feel motivated to help. And so compassion is something that requires action. Empathy is I feel for you. I may or may not do something about it. Compassion requires action. And then I said already that I wanted to kind of touch on pity. Pity, and by the way, I don't want anyone to feel badly if you use these words differently. But pity sometimes comes from a place of almost being condescending. And I'm not saying that's always true. But so I want to just take you back to years ago. I don't even remember. It could be the 1980s, an old television show, which all of you who are listening, you can probably go find clips of it on YouTube, called The A-Team. And it was this band of misfits. I don't even remember all of the story.
Yeah, with Mr. T and yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And Mr. T, can you do a good Mr. T? I don't know if I can. Mr. T had a saying, it would go like this: I pity the fool. Okay?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I saw this in German, right,
Oh, okay.
in Europe, so I have never seen the English version.
Oh, yeah, and I don't know
believe
how
you.
to say, how is it einfühlen? Einfühling. Ich einfühling das, I don't know the word for fool.
Pity the fool. I wouldn't know what Mr. T said in German.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so he used to say, I pity the fool. And not that everybody means it the same way, but I like to use this example because look at this sentence, pity and fool, in the same sentence. And the way he says it, by the way, it's meant to be in a confrontational way, because really kind of what he's saying is like, I pity the fool who tries to take me on, kind of thing. But so again, pity and fool, do you see how that is, pity can be condescending? Like, I feel sorry for you if you're going to try to take me on. And so now I'm not saying that when everyone says pity, but I will just ask everyone who's listening, sometimes when you think about when you say or think, I pity that person, sometimes, and I realize this is not, you may not like this, sometimes that pity is like a comparison, like I'm better off. So if you look at somebody who's a street person and you feel pity for them, I'm not saying you're being mean-spirited, but pity might indicate that you feel like I'm so much better off because I have a house and they don't. So that's why we don't use pity in this equation. Make sense?
What does compassion have to do with my being a project manager? I have deadlines to reach, and nobody shows me any compassion if I don't meet them.
Well, I'm sorry, first of all. Okay, now, so at the beginning, I said you're going to find out about how we talk about this in business schools and positive organizational, scholarship and positive deviations, what makes organizations successful, and some studies have been done on Newsweek and Reuters and Macy's and Cisco, by the way, just to throw that in there. But so still, what does that have to do with you as a project manager? Your organization has a culture. So your company, your corporation has a culture. It's like the personality. We've all heard this many times. Well, your project team is an organization, and you are a subset of your larger organization. Now, if you are managing in a strong, projectized organization, then you may really create your own culture. But otherwise, you are a subset of the culture. And if you can leverage and bring compassion to the culture of your team, we've already know that if we look at some of the case studies, and so by the way, you can go to harvardbusinessreview.org and type in the word compassion and see lots of different articles come up about it. And what you can find is that those who feel compassion at work, they work harder. They have less burnout, they're more motivated, and they take more ownership. So now let me come back to you and say, is that something you would like your project team to do?
Absolutely.
That's the link.
Okay.
That's the link.
Are conflict resolution and compassion related?
Absolutely. They are related. And
because conflict resolution is something that every project manager has to do.
No. No.
Yeah, they say that there is only one type of project where you will not have conflict. That's a one-person project.
Well, okay. Now, I work sometimes by myself, and
oh, you have conflict with yourself.
I don't know if I should confide this to everybody. It's too late. I've already started saying it, but some of my friends have told me that I talk to myself. So I don't know. But that might be a different version of the podcast. That might be the psychological help for people who work by themselves too much podcast. But so coming back to conflict and compassion, absolutely. If you can take a look at someone, and let's say right now we're assuming unproductive conflict, the kind of conflict that is hostile, as opposed to productive conflict where you and I could disagree about something and we're just two professionals having a conversation, and when we're done, we can go have tea. But unproductive, especially, if you can look at the person that you are engaged in unproductive conflict with, and it's hostile, and you can look back and recognize that as a result of this conflict, they are suffering. Because you can look at them and you can see, oh my gosh, look how angry he is. His eyes are bulging out of his head. He's turning red. That is not comfortable mentally or physically. His blood pressure is probably even rising. He might even feel like pounding in his head or his heart in his chest, right? So this is truly a person who is suffering. And then if you can look and feel, I don't feel happy that this person is suffering. I feel that not happy that this person is suffering. And so you can think, I'd like to get through this conflict in a way that I can help this person no longer have his eyes bulging out of his head and turning red and blood pressure up. And so you can apply. In fact, see, I'm going through, when I did that, I actually went through what I use as the definition for compassion. And now I'm taking that into 3 steps to look at someone, to muster some compassion when you're having conflict with them.
All right. Enough theory here. Let's move into practical application. How do I use compassion as a project manager?
Okay. Well, since we just talked about conflict resolution, why don't you, or all of us, turn around and help our teams use compassion when they are engaged in less than productive conflict? And we can do this by asking them to consider the other person's position and consider what the conflict might be doing to that other person. So that's one way. Something we haven't touched on yet. We can use compassion to help get rid of pent-up negativity. In other words, if we allow team members to vent in a safe way. So for example, if there's some new policy or a crazy new deadline or a big budget cut, and team members are not happy about it, we can tell them, shush, get back to work. You're spending time complaining, which is time that could be spent meeting the deadline, so get back to work. Or we could say, okay, let's just go. Let's go outside. Let's go someplace secure. We're going to have a vent session. You can vent for, a limited amount of time. I want you to get everything out on the table. But then you need to bring them back to, okay, now we've had a chance to vent. We've had a chance to express that we're not happy about this. Now let's work together to find out what are the steps we are going to take to learn to deal with this. And this is good because when people walk around with negativity, then they are unhappy, they're less engaged. And this also leads to, by the way, another approach, which is practicing forgiveness. And there has been some work done that shows that in companies, organizations, where employees are encouraged to forgive one another when somebody's upset, to forgive upper management when there's a layoff or some other transgression. Those who forgive have more tranquility, which means they have more ability to focus, which brings you back again to, bottom line business case. The more focused person is the more productive person. Now, there's something, of course, that's obvious. This is a big one, which I hope everyone already does anyway. Reaching out to colleagues who are going through a difficult time and expressing your concern, letting them know that they're suffering. A wonderful example that I read about was at a company where a woman's husband had cancer, and it was a rather protracted illness. And she had used up all her time, all her sick time, all her vacation time. And her coworkers went to HR and said, can we build a pool of time for her by putting in some of our time? And although that's very much not traditional, the HR group, thank you, because this place, thank goodness that this place had a culture of compassion, said yes. And so they took a lot of their time. Some of them probably maybe gave up all their time. And they built her buckets of time off that she could draw from. And then in addition to that, by the way, they also took shifts so that when they weren't at work, if she was at work, they would be there with her husband or take him to doctor's appointments or clean her house or go to the grocery store. I mean, so that's one of to me, that's like an ultimate shining example. And with that, you know what that really means? It means stop thinking about me and start thinking about we. And so coming back to us as leaders, it's the difference between a leader who says, look what I did. And I've worked for that person. So I'm picturing someone, look what I did versus look what we did. Or even better, to look at your team and say, look at what you did. And I'm talking about when there's a success, not when something negative has happened. Do you see my point with that?
Yep. Everything so far makes sense, Margaret. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to do a little check-in. All right. If you think less about, this is going to sound odd too, less about your status and more about providing useful and clear information to your team. For example, sometimes, and I realize this has to do with politics, so see, this goes back to the kind of culture we create at our companies. Sometimes we're so worried about what we say in a status presentation or in a status report that we don't even know if it's helpful. And if we can't provide our team members helpful information, then we are causing suffering because they don't know what to do. So when you think about, this kind of goes back to something that causes conflict. Two of the biggest causes of conflict for team members are role conflict and role ambiguity. Role conflict being you and I both think we should be doing the same job or parts of the same job, and so we have a conflict over that. Role ambiguity being I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And that, you could say, leads to a kind of conflict that's unproductive, so we could say that's a type of suffering. So as a project manager, if I'm not providing you clear information, that I am actually leading to your suffering. But if I can see that not providing you clear information leads to suffering, and I can feel that I don't want you to go through that kind of suffering, then I can take the action of creating status that is meaningful. So there you go. I bet that when we started this conversation today, I wonder how many people thought I was going to talk about how status reports could be compassionate, but they can.
Yes, they can be, and I have a personal example here because one of my team members, people in our company really didn't understand what she was doing and what kind of benefit she was providing to the company. And so what I started doing is we had biweekly status reports, and in every status report, I highlighted her successes.
Nice.
Okay. And within the shortest time, people suddenly began to understand what was going on. I had already left the company, and about 4 or 5 months later, she called me up and said, I got a raise thanks to you.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Just because I realized, something is not going right here. And I wanted to make people understand what's going on here. And you're wrong. This person really is doing something for us.
See, you saw there was, and you saw, I think, the potential for her suffering in that situation. If people didn't understand her value, then she was going to be devalued, potentially laid off for no reason, no logical reason. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Allowing your team to question you and even to debate with you is a form of compassionate behavior. It goes back to allowing them to engage in productive conflict. It goes back to allowing them to release pent-up negativity, even practicing forgiveness. But that can't come if you don't allow your team to question your ideas, your decisions. Allow your team to experience failure. Now, with this one, I want to say we need to be careful with that. There's somebody I used to work for, and he had this expression, and it comes to mind. And some of you have heard this expression before, And sometimes it's funny, but sometimes it's not. And with this particular person, just knowing about what I believe, which could be wrong, but what I believe the basis for his actions, he would say, let's give them enough rope to hang themselves. And
Ouch.
yes, right? And so in other words, he was saying, like, let's let this person jump out there and mess up. But the rest of the phrase, to hang themselves, so we know that, going to the gallows usually results in death. So in other words, let them mess up and then let's yell at them, which is, by the way, what I knew to be true in this person, as opposed to let's create a safe experience for someone to work a little bit and maybe have a little bit of failure, but not like a big catastrophic, you just ruined the entire project, you made us double our schedule and budget. But we do need to allow people to experience some failure in order to grow and then not punish them.
Let me interrupt you here quickly.
Yes.
Earlier on, you talked about practicing forgiveness. Now we're talking about, they need to experience failure. Failure is okay. How about, and here is me as the project manager speaking again, how about holding people accountable for what they need to be doing? Yes, forgiveness, yes, failure, but there has to be some accountability. How do I show compassion in that context?
This is a good question, and I appreciate that you're bringing this up, because it is because of potential situations like this that some people will say there's no room to be compassionate at work, or I can't be compassionate because I'm the leader. And that simply isn't true. In fact, I would propose to you that if I write you a fake good review, that's actually not compassionate. If I don't hold you accountable for your goals, that is also not compassionate, because you are going to suffer as a result of those. For example,
yeah, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when I take I'll just call it the easy way out. Let's say I take the easy way out and I just, every year I look at somebody and I smile across the desk and I nod and I give them an average review, but in my head I'm like, oh, I wish they'd quit. You know who I'm trying to make things easier for? Myself, because I don't want to have a difficult conversation. And so it becomes about how do I have that difficult conversation? And so going back to being accountable, to be compassionate doesn't mean that every time somebody misses a deadline, I just go, oh, okay. Well, you have good hair today. It's not that. It's coming from a place of most people want to do a good job. And most people, when they don't do a good job, they know it. And so many people, when they are consistently missing deadlines, especially if it's a deadline that they were really bought into, they're not feeling good. So they are, in fact, already coming from a type of suffering. And so to treat them with compassion is to acknowledge, yes, you missed this deadline. And I'm not going to lie. I'm going to say you missed this deadline and it was on the critical path. So this is a challenge to us because we are going to be late now. But I am going to work with them to help make it better. If a person consistently cannot perform, then even though this is not fun, most of us don't love this conversation. The compassionate thing to do is to help them move on. So there you go.
Yeah. We project managers, we're always results driven. We need to show results. We have deadlines. We have requirements to complete. How is all of this compassion quantifiable for my project? You already mentioned earlier on that people who see compassion, studies have shown that they work harder, they give more. Is there anything else?
Yes, there is something else. There was some work done, and this is an older case study, but I'm still going to bring it up because it helps make a few points. Back in 2001, after the Twin Towers fell, the airline industry took a significant hit, as we can all understand why. And a few years later, some work was done to analyze the airlines that came out ahead. and the airlines that didn't. And one of the airlines that came out ahead was Southwest. And in fact, during the time where the rest of the airlines were floundering, Southwest was in articles in like Fortune magazine as one of the most successful companies of the year. And one of the reasons why had to do with the way in which Southwest communicated with and treated their employees and the decision they made not to cut staff. And although, by the way, this doesn't mean if you have to lay people off that you're doomed and you can never consider yourself to be compassionate again, because there are going to be times where cuts have to be made. But Southwest decided to put their people first and to include their people in the conversation about what was going on with the company and with profits, whereas other airlines immediately began cuts, administered them in difficult ways, didn't tell the truth about what was happening and where the cuts would be. And so there's a whole case study that shows Southwest and how during that time, how actually their return on investment grew. Now, I can't tell you that it's 100% because of compassion, that it's 100% because of how they treated their people. I can tell you that it is a contributing factor.
How do you personally help your own customers? I mean, you're a consultant, you're a coach. How do you help your customers with compassion?
Well, I'm glad you asked this question because as I was, looking forward to our time together, I had this aha moment of my own, which is just about every time that you and I have been talking, Cornelius, we have been talking about compassion. I just never came out and said it out loud. So people who, have listened to me before, who read my blog, well, I'll come back to where to find me in a second. I've been talking to you about compassion for years. And it's always been at the heart of when I share the message of treating people well and of remembering who you see so often. It's the people you work with and how to treat each other with respect. We've been talking about compassion together for years. We just never said it out loud. And now I'm just saying it out loud, that this is what I'm representing and this is what I want us to do. And I want us to become more aware and compassionate leaders. And I get to do that in different ways through teaching project management courses. And you'd be surprised where even in an introduction to project management course, you can slip in conversations about how to compassionately work through a conflict. And people can find me, on LinkedIn, just as Margaret Meloni. You can come see me at elearning4pms.com because that's the site where I do more soft skills training. So, this is, I'll say how I do it and how I've been doing it. It's just that now I'm officially calling it, this is about being compassionate at work.
Before you were a coach and mentor, you worked in the IT industry. You led your own projects.
I did.
Do you have an example for us where you used compassion on your own projects?
Sure. And sometimes it was little things. Mm-hmm. Little things like asking a group of people who were going to spend the night working on a conversion to make up a list of all the snacks they wanted. And then even when they started playing with me and coming up with weird random things, going and finding those weird random things and bringing them back to them. It's looking at someone who has a fever and you could stand next to them in their cubicle and feel the fever from a foot away and knowing that you have a deadline and still sending them home. Even though your boss is yelling at you, which, by the way, was happening. My boss was saying, "What are you doing? This person is willing to work. You're crazy." And me turning around and saying, "This person is not fit to be working, and we're going to send her home. And you know what? She might be fine in 24 hours, in which case everything will be fine. And if not, we'll figure something else out." Of course, then the response was, "And if you don't, your head's on the line." But you see how I've been pushed towards compassion too, because of some of the people I've interacted with. But you know what? In that example, that person was fine in 24 hours and she came back and made the deadline. So I was fortunate. I can't tell you that's how it's always going to be. And sometimes it's just listening to somebody. Sometimes it's just listening to somebody who's upset about something. Sometimes it's stepping in and helping someone. Maybe it's you have a colleague. So maybe you have a peer project manager and they're not good at public speaking, and so you co-present with them. There's so many things we can do. I mean, I know we think about the big things, and the big things are important. I mean, how bad would it be if somebody on your team lost a loved one and you just ignored it? But it's the day in, day out that really builds the compassion on the team.
You mentioned that we've been talking about compassion in many of our discussions in the past, and that just brought up another interview that you and I did. It was actually one of the webinars that you and I recorded, How to Deal with Jerks at Work.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, how can I be compassionate when I have all these jerks around me at my workplace? That's really hard, isn't it?
It is. I think that's where we really get tested. Okay. And so, first of all, I know you've heard me say this, so I just want to remind you and everyone else of this expression that goes like this. Nobody is difficult all of the time, but all of us are difficult some of the time. So
yeah, right.
I'm someone's jerk. I don't know who it is right now, and we're not going to take time right now to figure that one out, but I'm someone's jerk. So how do we do that? Well, when somebody is, I'll say, chronically jerky, there we go, chronic jerkitis. If somebody has chronic jerkitis, which, by the way, it's not compassionate of me to say jerk, but shame on me, because I'm calling a name, and that's so I'm not being very compassionate, but it helps the conversation, I guess I'll say it that way. So if we have somebody who is chronic in their behavior, then I would say something is causing them to be unhappy. Because again, most of us, and I'm not talking about people who are truly mentally or emotionally ill, although they are suffering too, but most of us, again, want to do a good job, want to be well respected by our coworkers, and even, we also want some of our coworkers to like us. And so if I'm behaving in a way where I'm being your jerk, it's likely I'm coming from a place of suffering. And if you can look at me and say, whatever is causing Margaret to act like this, she's clearly suffering. And I feel badly that she is another living being who is suffering. And so maybe I will try to change my approach to lessen the suffering. And see now, by the way, that would also lessen the suffering to you if I was, less jerky. But in that moment when you're thinking that way, you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking outside of yourself. You're not thinking me. You're thinking we. It takes practice, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
It takes practice.
Here's my final question for you today. And this is something that I've actually learned from you, because becoming more compassionate very likely, I guess, means introspection, means beginning with myself first, right? So other than all the tips that you've already given, the actions that we can take and just apply it, what are the first 3 steps that you would recommend to our listeners that they take in order to include more compassion as part of who they are as project managers?
Okay. Well, the first step is noticing. Begin to notice what causes others to be uncomfortable. So the first step is noticing. And that means get outside your head. So get outside yourself. Because I can't notice others if I'm all wrapped up in this shoe hurts and why did I put these shoes on today or whatever. So get outside your own head and begin to notice others and notice what causes them suffering. See if when you notice that someone is suffering, you can begin to develop feelings of empathy for them, of how it might feel if you were in that position. And then consider, is this a situation where I'm going to take action? And the answer is not always going to be yes, because I'm not saying quit your jobs and become compassion crusaders. I'm just saying there's so many opportunities for us to extend compassion to one another. And you know what? Start with small stuff. Start with the coworker who you see working through lunch, and whether or not you perceive that to be his or her own fault. If you've got a protein bar in their drawer and you see that they're hungry and they can't get away from their desk, bring them the protein bar. It's a start. So I say start small. And, it's a cliche, but it's a good cliche. The cliche, do one kind thing every day. And then once you do one, you'll want to do more, because The secret, it's not such a secret, the secret to being compassionate to others is, even though I'm saying get outside of yourself and think we and not me, is you will feel good. And when you feel good, your cortisol decreases and you won't have as much stress. And so you will reap benefits too.
So be compassionate to others because it will make you feel good.
That is a reason.
As one of the
a reason. I think the short saying, I'm paraphrasing, is along the lines of, if you want to be happy, treat others well.
All right, Margaret, thank you so much for having me on the program today. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Talk to you next time for our 1 billionth.
And that was our compassionate interview with Margaret Meloni. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com, and when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. Also, don't forget to stop by at freeexamsimulator.com to test out our PMP exam simulator. If you are getting ready for the exam, then there is no better way to gauge your readiness than with an exam simulator. And finally, we have this. Goals are dreams with deadlines. Until next time.